looking over some viewer games. So thanks all for being here. Thanks all for playing in the Simul this morning. And yeah, I just wanted to take a look at the Najdorf. So the Najdorf is the open Sicilian with a6, d6, and knight to f6 having been played. It can transpose a few different ways, but honestly, it's basically this: pawn to d4, pawn takes d4, knight takes d4, knight to f6, knight to c3, and a6. Um, this is a very common Sicilian opening line. In terms of popularity in the Sicilian, it's one of the most common. Bishop to g5 is the most common response for white here. Bishop to e3 is what I'm the most familiar with. This is called the English attack. Bishop to e2 is the Obshensky variation, and bishop to c4 is the Lipnitsky attack. What's interesting about bishop to c4 is that it puts the bishop on a diagonal that's not necessarily the best one. Basically that bishop to c4 to bishop to f7 diagonal in the Najdorf Sicilian. That tends to be kind of a complicated way to play it. With e6, that diagonal can become very weak for white. So overall, I guess what I would say about it is, bishop to c4 in the Sicilian is something that you have to be pretty careful about, and you have to be ready for e6 if e5 hasn't yet been played. And basically, it's often not the best diagonal for the bishop. That said, bishop to c4 is still playable here. Bishop to c4, can get introduced with f4, f5. That will open the diagonal. That's kind of a common theme to the Grand Prix attack. But yeah, so bishop to c4 here. Let's just take a look at the overall evals. Here, basically, white's up by 0.3 pawns or so. And let's just take a look. Bishop to g5 is about 0.28. Bishop to c4 is about 0.01. And yeah, hey, welcome, Caitlin. Thank you very much for being here. Thanks for joining, and yeah, happy to see you. So yeah, we've got at least Caitlin on the stream. Not sure if anyone else is here, but yeah. So far, welcome, Caitlin. Thanks for being here. And yeah, bishop to c4 is a move that bishop to c4, I guess I would say, is a move that can run into e6. If e6 gets played, this bishop is facing towards f7, but then it gets stuck on e6 is the main point. So it gets stuck there basically. And with that, I guess I would say, white's basically, white's bishop is kind of misplaced on that diagonal. And we could look at some other opportunities for white. I guess I would say bishop to g5 is a big one, bishop to e2, bishop to e3. A lot of different choices for white. Yeah, let's take a look at some of the lines that come out of bishop to e3. So bishop to e3, black has opportunities to do things like play b5. White has the opportunity to play f3, bishop to e2, a3. And basically, black will expand quickly on the queen side while white will try to get developed. So that's the main thing to think about there. With bishop played here and f3 about to be played as well. So bishop to e3, there's a few lines for black. E5 forces the knight to move. Here, knight to b3 is about 3 times as common as knight to f3. So that's the e5 line. E6 line is much more passive. This is the Schwenigen variation. Basically, you can play f3, bishop to e2, g4, and this is kind of standard stuff where white will end up attacking aggressively on the king side. But yeah, so bishop to e2, f3, g4, and white will push hard here. Hey, welcome, Richard. Thanks for joining the stream. So yeah, g4 will start the attack early. This is the delays Kier's attack. The Kier's attack is, basically defined by g4. Really early g4s in the Sicilian go under the Kier's attack. So this Najdorf transposing into the Sicilian is the Kier's attack, or delayed Kier's attack. F4 takes the center, Matanovich attack. A4 is playable, but basically there's just a lot of different choices for white. Bishop to c4 is kind of a surprising choice. Like I said, bishop's facing on f7, so with bishop to e6 here, basically, with e6, basically that bishop's on a kind of misplaced diagonal, so I'm surprised by that. But I guess I would say the most common here is f3. This strengthens that pawn on e4. It weakens the defense on the knight, but with e6 and d6 having been played by black, the knight is secure, so there's not really much to worry about there. And other moves for black here, knight to g4, bishop to g5 is probably good for white. Alternatively, knight g6. f3, I guess I would say. This is the full-on like English attack basically with f3, and it becomes the Yugoslav attack, transposes into a dragon type line with f3, bishop e3, queen to d2, queenside castling. These are all opportunities for white. So yeah, it's really up to determine kind of what white wants to play, what white's most interested in, and what kind of game are you looking for really is the main it's kind of the main situation. So I guess I would say here we can take a look. Let's look at the burn attack. This is a Yu versus Carlsen game, and here we go. Let's take a look, kind of at how the grandmasters play it. But I just wanted to give kind of a high level overview of of what the different options in this opening look like. So let's look at this game, Yu versus Carlsen, and here we go. Okay, so here, e4, c5, knight to f3, d6, d4. Okay, pawn takes, and then we are into the Najdorf theory. They go into the English attack with bishop to e3, e5. This is what we were talking about as being kind of the most common. And then Yu here plays knight to f3. The most common was knight to b3. That was about 3 times as common. But with the knight to f3 here, this is also a very playable English attack Najdorf line. Bishop to e7, bishop to c4, castles, knight to c6, bishop to b3. And basically, black's got a few different options. Bishop to e6 is playable, knight to a5 is playable, but black is basically just going to be pushing, and white is going to correspond with like bishop to g5, bishop to d2, and have kind of a sustained attack on the d6 square. So knight to a5, bishop g5, knight takes b3, a takes b3, bishop to e6. I guess here white's pretty comfortable. I think bishop takes f6 is probably the best play for white. Bishop to f6 followed by knight to d5 is probably pretty unlikely to, or basically, it's not as if it's going to end up in a 2 bishops versus 2 knights situation. With bishop takes f6, knight takes f6, knight to d5, basically white's going to end up playing something like knight takes f6, or black's going to play something like bishop takes d5. But basically here the situation's about equal. It's an equal game. Rook to c8, c4, bishop to g4, and I like white's placement in the center here. I mean, even given that black has the 2 bishops, I think white's situation makes sense. This ends up being kind of a solid way to play as white. Ideas here, basically, this is not, this Najdorf Sicilian, this isn't one where white's gotten kind of an overpowering attack on the king side. White can probably play knight takes g5, followed by f4, followed by rook takes f4. I think that'll be probably the best way that white can play this. Knight takes, queen to d3 is what the Super GM played. So I guess what I would say is, white's got very solid center control. He's got the worst minor piece, but he does have his knight posted very well. White's going to have kind of prolonged attacks on, d6. I think it's going to be a big tactical option for white. Bishop takes, rook to c6. And the queen's going to have threats on d6. White's going to be able to do things like play g3 and f4 and have a threat on f7. But overall here, I guess what I would say is that the white is pretty much, that white is pretty much fine. In terms of breaking open this position, white's going to have this, kind of sustained attack on d6. Black's going to be able to move his bishops to rook to c5 at some point, but he can't now because of the rook on b7. But in terms of who's getting attacked more urgently here, queen facing on d6 is kind of the biggest threat on this position. Black has this backwards pawn on the open file, and that's going to be kind of a problem for black. So I think rook a d1, rook to d3, f rook to d1, and just pressure from white onto d6. I guess I would say is the main thing. Rook fd1, rook c8, rook d3, queen to e7. And I guess here I would say, yeah, rook fd1. Basically focus all the forces on the d6 pawn is a good plan for white. King to g7, king to g2, rook to e8, queen to d3. Okay, so I guess what I would say in this game is basically white didn't capitalize on this. Basically white had this strong attack going, and with rook to c3 in particular, I kind of don't understand where he's going with this. So rook to c3, facing, rook to c3 gets put behind the pawn. I don't really think the c pawn was under attack. I mean, I guess b5 potentially, and then pawn takes b5. But overall, I think white's good here. E4, c5, knight to f3, d6, d4. This is the Najdorf, bishop to e3, e5, knight to f3. I mean, just very kind of mainline stuff. Bishop e7, bishop to c4, castles, castles. White's up by about 0.3 pawns, and yeah, it's up to kind of white to determine how to continue. Things like queen to d3, things like bishop to b3, a lot of different options for white. Focus on d6 as white, and yeah, I think basically just continue forward. So yeah, I guess Carlsen defends kind of in a very resilient way. But the moves all kind of make sense. It shows kind of a common theme in this in this opening, which is basically with the e5 move, which is a very common Najdorf game. So on bishop to e3, e5 is one of the most common responses. Basically, white can go either to knight f3 or knight to b3, but it doesn't really matter in terms of once e5 is played. Black's going to have this backwards pawn on this open file ready to be attacked by the queen. So I guess that's the main point. That's kind of what's going on here. And the knight can move to like f3 or the knight can move to b3, but either way, white's going to have sustained threats on the d6 pawn. He'll never, I don't think white will ever voluntarily allow d5. So pressure from the white queen onto d6 is a very common theme after e5. Overall in this game, queen takes d5. This is forking pawns on on b7 and d6. Rook to c6 is the only tactical move that deals with both of them. And white's just going to square up force on d6 and make this the point of attack for the rest of the game. g3, g6, rook to d1. All this sort of makes sense. Basically, white is attacking aggressively, black is defending as best he can. Just as things should be. In terms of high level GM openings. I mean, neither player has erred in any real way. And I think white's plan here is going to be to play c5. But if black doesn't give him the opportunity, they're just gonna draw out. So basically, if in this case, so with the queen on c7, then c5 becomes more playable, and then white's interested in playing like queen to d5 to support c5, and then threats on c6 and c7. That's the play for white. But here, both sides kind of determine that there's not really any way to advance this, and white can't really create any vulnerabilities with the position without exposing himself to risk. So anyways, just a very stable, correctly played game by two super GMs. And with bishop to e3 here, knight to f3, the threat's going to be about d6 for the rest of the game. And that's actually exactly what happens. This knight gets outposted well, but white's going to have these sustained attacks on d6. And yeah, I guess I would say rook to d1, queen to c7, and white's exerting pressure on d6, ready to attack and take d6 if possible. But black, as the world champion, doesn't really give white any opportunities. So I guess what I would say is it's a good opportunity. It's an interesting and very soundly played game by white. One of the main focuses in this is the Sicilian Najdorf. This basically involved focus on d6 as opposed to focus on the king side by white. And black made threats on c4. Black tried to push against the queen side. And yeah, I guess I would just say rook to d. The rooks and queens were focused on d6, and no real way to advance there. So, anyways, very interesting game. Yeah, we can take a look at some more. So that's you and Carlsen playing the Najdorf. Let's take a look at another one. This is you also playing the white side. You versus Firozia, and let's take a look at this one. Cool. So we got you versus Firozia here as white. Oops, I pasted it wrong. Here we go. But really, what I want to do is, I think it can often be very helpful in these kind of high-level GM games to just get to take slow down, take a look, and see kind of what the GMs are thinking in this position. This one also came out of e5. We saw that Yu's way of playing against this early e5 against the English attack in the Najdorf is with knight to f3, queen to c7, and then here. Basically black plays a different move this time. In the previous game, I think it was bishop to e7 or bishop to e6. But here, I can't remember what it was in the last game. But queen to c7 is the choice that black makes here. Bishop to e7 is the most common move for black. But queen to c7, doesn't solve the problem related to the pawn on d6, but it does solve any ideas of a pin on the queen on d8. So queen to c7 is the second most popular. Followed by that, a4 is the most popular, bishop to e7, bishop to e2, and basically here, this is going to be kind of a more kingside oriented game for white. White's still going to have that advanced attack on d6. White's going to be able to play queen to d2, castles queenside, h3, g4, and be able to put pressure on the king side. But here, castles, castles or a5. It's up to basically. Sorry about that. But it's up to kind of the plate to sort of decide who to play. So um, castles, bishop to e6, a5, and basically white's fine. I think white can play bishop to b6, so white can play knight to d5, and overall, I think this focus is I mean I would direct focus here towards the king side, but that is not the GM level plan. So interesting. The Najdorf Sicilian, I'm surprised by these super GMs playing each other. I guess maybe these kind of aggressive tactical attacks on the king side, the ones that I consider to be the most likely against the Sicilian. This is 2 games in a row where white has basically chosen to play in the center or on the queen side. Let's take a look at a Najdorf from neither of these 2 players, but I'm just kind of interested in seeing that the Sicilian, basically the Sicilian Najdorf player is basically, pushing hard on the king side. So knight to d2, knight to f6, queen to b3. Basically, white's got a solid play here, about 1.7 pawns or so. And just a very comfortable position for white. Queen to b5, basically pawn takes d6 can be playable. But overall, I generally like white's position. Queen takes, bishop takes, knight to e4. This is a solid position for white. White's getting a lot of play on the queen side, and ultimately doesn't seem to be able to capitalize. Let's see it at the furthest point. So, right around here. King to f2 is considered a mistake. g4 is better. We're well into the realm of very positional things here. I guess what I would say here is, white seems to have an aggressive attack on the queen side here, and the king pushing his way in with f2 and e3. I think that's going to be a good kind of long sustainable plan. So king to f2, king to e3. I think that's a good way to do it. And I guess what I would say here is just basically continue to push forward as white, continue to play. And I think that's kind of the objective and strongest route for white. So let's take a look. We can take a look at another Najdorf. But so far, I'm kind of impressed. Basically, that player he ends up playing on the center and queen side both times, which is against kind of the standard opening principles. So here, let's take a look. Is d6 a good move for white in this position? Let's take a look. D6. So I think it's fine. What the engine is evaluating as best for white is bishop to f5, bishop to f8. I guess what I would say is that you do risk overextension. But yeah, I think otherwise, with bishop to f8, your bishop, it's not as if you have to play d6 or move the pawn from d5 here. You can play bishop to f8 because the rook is pinned to the defense of this bishop on c7. So is d6 a good move here? Good question. I mean, again, I'm sort of second guessing GMs here. So, what am I, it's a tough question, but the super GM played king to f2. g4 was considered to be the best move by the engine, and I think d6 is playable. I think it's just a very complicated position. We'd have to spend a lot longer on this, and again, this lesson is mostly, I mostly want to focus on the kind of opening lines and thematic considerations of the Najdorf Sicilian. So yeah, is d6 a good move? I mean, I guess it's not as good as g4. But in order to really grasp the higher level stuff going on in this position, it's going to basically require a lot of time and a lot of study of the tactical play. So g4 is basically pushing this king side forward, and here I would just say that white is better. So king to f2 is the way that white would continue. King to f2, f5, knight to c3. Basically just continue to move the position forward. Keep things as they are with the bishop on c7 and the rook on c8. Basically keep the rook on c8 when the rook is on d7 and the bishop's on c7. And there's no reason to play d6 immediately. King to f2 is fine. The engine is recommending g4. The engine is also recommending bishop to f8. So is it a good move? I think it's a tactical question, not a positional one. Anyways, maybe I'm going through these openings, or basically going through these openings to a deeper line than I need to. But basically, what I want to do here is look at the different lines in this game. So, I guess what I would say here is let's look. This is a different player as opposed to you playing e4, and as opposed to you playing the Sicilian Najdorf. This one's played by Van Foreest. And basically, here he plays this variation. We found this variation. It was called the freak attack. Basically, this early rook to g1. And what we found about this is that it pairs well with g4 and aggressive attacks on the king side. So knight to c6, g4, g6, g5. Basically, here I think White's in a good position. White's options are bishop to h3 and h4. And yeah, I guess I would say that White is pretty solid. We were looking at this. I mean, we were looking at the different lines out of this idea, and I think, with G4, Black's not worse. What's my favorite opening? Naturally Lucid. I guess what I would say is that, I play the Italian game. One of the things is I didn't really put that much time into learning opening theory. As I was improving, I was mostly focused on tactics, and I think that tactics are probably the best way to improve, quickly. So yeah. This is a great opportunity for me to go through and learn all this opening theory. Sicilian, basically I couldn't have named, half of the lines on this list. Rook to G1. Well, they happen a lot more frequently. GM, if basically, basically the GM, or basically one happened to me this week. It happened to me when I simeled, and I went 0-50 because all my games defaulted. 300 elo drops are a lot. That's what I would say. But yeah, if you're looking at my rating went down by about 300 points, and it basically dropped because of the it basically dropped because of all these defaulted games in the simul, when there was a technical glitch. So yeah, interesting. What's your endgame book, Naturally Lucid? I'm curious. Yeah, what are my thoughts on GM 300 elo drops? They're pretty unusual. They really take special cases. Defaulting 50 games at once will do it. That's what happened to me. But yeah, yeah, I would say that those tend to be pretty unusual. GM Nihonium. Anyways, so rook to g1, knight to c6, g4, g6. G5. This puts a lot of pressure on Black as White. White's up by about two-thirds of a pawn here. Knight to d7, and White is comfortable. I mean, overall, this attack, this g4 g5 attack, which initially looks overly aggressive, actually ends up being fine. I mean, you don't do anything to disrupt the queen side. White will end up castling on the queen side. And with this g4, g5, Black doesn't really meet it at any point. The best move is considered to be h6 for Black here. On h6, g5, and then h takes g5. This is good for Black. G4 favorably by White, and good positions will stem from it. So that's mainly what I have to say there. Pawn takes f6, knight takes f6, knight to d5. And yeah, king to d7. Overall here, I guess I would say White has a comfortable position. White's up by about 0.4 pawns. And with bishop to g4, bishop to e2, White's just good. Practical chess games by Paul Kiers. Okay, cool. Yeah, that sounds good, Naturally Lucid. I stick with, I have this basic chess end games by Fine that I've been going through. It works pretty well. There are a few good endgame books. Learning the technicals behind endgames is super helpful. You know which positions to trade into and which positions to not trade into, or get at least a better understanding of that. And basically, I think that's really interesting, Naturally Lucid. How do you get better at puzzles? I guess what I would say is just keep practicing GM Nihonium. Yeah, just basically practice for an hour or two a day, and keep keep at it. Just persistence is the main point. So anyways, I really like getting to go through these games. It improves my opening knowledge. Just so I learn, and just in case anyone's interested, rook to g1 is this freak attack. This is basically playable. G6 is the best opportunity, I think, for Black. Depending on what the engine plays. E5 also playable. E5 and then knight to b3. The knight goes to b3 almost exclusively in this case. and g4 becomes the move to play for white. So with rook to g1, you're signaling g4 for sure. I mean, like what else are you doing with the rook on g1? But black doesn't really have any great counterplay, so you're going to get this structure, this rook to g1 and g4 structure as white. So yeah, very interesting stuff. Very interesting kind of consistent outcomes. And as opposed to the other games where that player U was getting this aggressive attack on aggressive attack on the king side, or so sorry, where U was basically playing on the center and the queen side. This freak attack with G4 and G5, this gets that aggressive attack on the king side that the white's looking for. Interesting. Yeah, no, it's good to know how to deal with those situations in Naturally Lucid for sure. Basically, I would say that those types of games where you're basically where you're losing a long difficult end game. Those often come down to tactical errors. Often for the bigger games, those end up being tactical decisions. But if you want to learn an endgame book, that can often be helpful. It's never going to hurt you to learn more material. If you just study more and more, your understanding is going to get more and more complete. It may not solve the problem that I do. No, it can be. To be completely honest, I sort of think that chess lessons, chess coaching is kind of a scam. Basically, charging money for something that can easily be given for free en masse is a scam, in my opinion. So I give chess lessons for free. I don't need this money. I don't want that money because I would consider it to be kind of unfairly gained. Chess lessons can be given for free to as many people as you want. So I'm not really interested in participating in what I consider to be a scam, basically. The real, what's going to happen here is basically large streams with hundreds of people are going to displace chess coaching and going to displace, chess teaching that we have now. And I'm really happy about that, to be completely honest. I think that it's very unfair that people who have money to spend on chess lessons get to have chess lessons, and people who don't have money to spend on chess lessons don't. That seems really wrong to me. You can see it in the most extreme cases. People can't, afford to support their, promising improvement because they don't have the resources to play. So I guess, no, I don't do chess coaching, to be completely honest. I think it's an unfair way to, I think it's an unfair business model. We can easily give chess lessons for free online. We can easily give chess lessons for free to 100 people online. So no, I think it's a scam, basically. So it's interesting that you bring it up, but I obviously have fairly strong feelings on this topic. But yeah, this scales completely. Basically, this model. I saw GM Neeksons do it the other day. He taught 300 people at once for free. It was fantastic. It was one of his boot camps. And yeah, nothing will make me happier than when basically a scammy model is replaced by a much more economically efficient model. So yeah, no, the best thing to do under 15. Well, yeah, no. I guess what I would say is it's just a scam. So I don't know. I don't. If you can teach 300 people for free, then it seems really unfair to only be able to teach the 5 richest ones of those. And that's sort of what ends up happening, with the paid chess lessons model the way that we have now. So yeah, thanks for asking. Thanks for talking about this. But yeah, if you can teach 300 people for free, it's wrong to teach the 5 richest ones who have the money to spend on your lessons. It's a scam. Anyways, that's my thoughts on that. So yeah, no, thank you, AKA, thank you very much for saying that. I appreciate it. But honestly, I'm just gonna keep doing this till it's free, and it will be free. So that's my thinking on that topic. So anyways, yeah, thanks very much. GM Nihonium, I think you're talking about something that's very true and accurate. And basically, what I would say is that that concept really comes down to tactical play. If you're under 1500, yeah, your games are going to end with pieces hanging all the time. That's going to be something that happens with frequency. So the best way to improve under 1500 is to make sure that you blunder a piece on move 4 as opposed to move 3, or ideally don't blunder a piece at all. But basically the point there is GM Nihonium is basically that you end up improving your tactical play so that you end up basically making it so that basically making it so that you can capitalize on your opponent's tactical errors and that you don't make tactical errors yourself. Just doing that well or doing that well enough and with 100% consistency, that'll get you to like I don't know, almost 2000, very high in the class level if you just stop making simple tactical errors. So that's what I would say about that. And yeah, for sure, GM Nahonium. That's a really good point. So yeah, early levels. I think the most important thing to do is play tactically, and or play and study tactically, and you can always circle back and get a deeper understanding later. You can always watch my lessons where I'm both teaching myself and teaching you kind of the deeper concepts. But the most important thing to do to improve from about 1200 to 2000 is just like an hour or two of tactile study a day for like a month or a few months. Is analyzing games from professionals good? Yeah, I guess I would say yes. So, looking at GM level games, that's definitely a thing that you can do to a thing that you can do to improve. So yeah, I guess I would say that GM. I think that basically looking at the GM level games, it's here's one of the things like in life, there's basically a lot of situations in which you can't really tell who's better than someone else at a particular skill. Like it's like who's a better conversationalist, like person A or person B? Like, you can't really tell, right? There's not an objective way to determine that. Or who's a better business person, right? Person A or person B? It's definitely not who makes the most money. So, I guess what I would say there is basically, unlike those situations, in chess, you really do know who's better. You really do know that a 2700 is better than a 2600. The 2700 is not going to beat the 2600 every single time, but overall, objectively that the 2700 is better than 2600. So in chess, where you have this very efficient measurement system, very accurate measurement system, what I would say is that basically, you should look at GM games. GM games are all over the place. Basically a lot of databases have them for free. There's chess-based, there's free chess-based databases. I was looking at one called chessgames.com. I thought this one was great. Let's just see. I think it's chess games. Like I'm just gonna look up some players. So like chess games Tartakower. But there was this one I was looking at. I thought it was chessgames.com. Basically, with chessgames.com, you can basically get big PGNs. Sorry, I guess this isn't the one I was looking for. Yeah, hold on one second. Like if you're just looking at Tartakower PGN, maybe I should take out the file type here, but yeah, there's a website. I don't know why I'm missing it, but basically, there's like a big collection of games by grandmasters. So like Grandmaster Games just search like Grandmaster Games PGN. There's a very specific site that I was looking for, but I'm sort of blanking on the name of it right now. Yeah, here you go. So yeah, like this one, for example, this is, the thing about chess games is that they're common domain. But yeah, gmchess.com/pgn/base is new. This looks fine to me. And this one's going to have all these high-level GM games in. If you want 1,500 games by Michael Adams, there you go. If you want 2,500 games by Tal, there you go. And yeah, you can just basically take these games and go with them. I like games where they're sorted by opening as well. If you have a favorite GM, then by all means, learn their opening repertoire. But their opening repertoire will be correct. But I guess what I would say is that that ends up being kind of a good opportunity. So, anyways, just consider that, and yeah, this is a good way to study. So this gmchess.com seems like a good way to get a whole bunch of PGNs if you'd like. And yeah, there are other sites, but there's no shortage of GM games online, and there's no shortage of games that would be helpful. Also, in a GM game, you can take a look at the accuracies and just make sure that they're, top line accuracy games. GMs make mistakes too, but yeah, overall here, I guess what I would say is that, this is this is a way to play it. So knight to b6, and then white's up by about half a pawn or a pawn, And yeah, I guess I would say, continue on this. Let's take a look. We can take a look at another one, another Nidorf game. This one is from Kovalev versus Van Foreest, and another draw. But again, I wanted to just kind of look, at the big picture questions in this, these games. And yeah, can I do some puzzles? I don't necessarily. Sure. Yeah. Actually, okay. We can do some puzzles. I guess. One of the things that's helpful well, I mean, actually, no. I'd rather do lessons, to be honest. I guess we can do. Let's do one puzzle battle, just because you asked. But yeah. Let's do one puzzle battle, and then we'll go back to the lesson. Honestly, puzzle battles not really what I'm interested in doing. To be completely honest, my goal is to make chess lessons free for everybody. And there are other people out there. I'm saying that are doing that are doing puzzle battle. So I don't really feel like I can add much value doing that. Anyways, here's this game. Okay. Yeah. So I'm playing an IM here. This guy's pretty strong. But we'll see how it goes. That looks fine. Queen takes knight. That gets rid of both of the pieces. That threatens on g7. And yeah. But anyways, this is an IM. You can snag some of the weaker IMs at Puzzle Battle. Like, the actual, like, really fast puzzle, it's a different skill. Basically, a GM might be great at calculation, but they might not be very good at determining kind of how to make the best decisions quickly. So, yeah, this is an IM. And yeah, he's pretty strong. This isn't kind of the most tactically strong or quick IM, but he's just studying the same way as anyone else is. So, okay. Back rank mate there. I don't see the answer to this one, to be honest, but okay. What am I supposed to do? H5? Yeah, I never understood. I didn't understand that puzzle, to be honest. This one, you play knight takes e3. But yeah, this guy's an IM. He's, again, strong. I think the bishop sacks, right? Yeah, I assumed. Just win the exchange on this. I assume, yeah, just win the exchange, I guess. Some of those are kind of underwhelming. Like, you just, like, have this massive tactic and then end up winning an exchange. Okay, this one... I don't know. There you go. That one took me a second. I had to think about that one too. Yeah, I snagged this FM. I think I should be all right here. But yeah, anyways, look, this is the most practical way to practice GM Nihonium. Anyways, honestly, it's all just practice. If you do enough of this, you will improve. But again, this isn't a lesson. This is sort of what you guys can do on your own. Just study this a lot, play a lot of this, and you will improve. You will get out of class level if you do a lot of tactical study. You need to be able to play accurately over the board. Tactics play into almost every situation. But yeah, that was an interesting game. That IM is not particularly strong relative to their rating in tactical play. That's fine. They have other strengths. Okay. So what's going on here? So this is another Nidorf variation game. Let's look at the options here. Queen to e2 is way down the list. I'm not sure I don't think this is a named line. Is queen to d3 a named line either? No. Yeah, we're out of the main lines here. So with queen to e2, you're playing white's playing kind of an offbeat line of this Najdorf. So with queen to e2, options for so that was in the last game. Rook to g1 was the freak attack. That was interesting. But yeah, that rook to g1 was the freak attack, and yeah. Well, let's go over the names again because honestly, I have a really bad understanding of them. English attack is bishop to e3. Bishop to e2 is the Oposhensky variation. Bishop to c4 is the Lipnitsky attack. F4 is the Amsterdam variation. And then I think the next named one after F4. Oh, H3 is the Adams attack, okay? G3, Zagreb variation. F3 doesn't have a name. And then the next one that's named, I think, is Rook to G1, which is the freak attack. And we saw in the last game. So I guess what I would say in this game, GM Nahonium, is basically that what you can do and what you can look at here is if you remembered one or two of those names, if you remember that bishop to e2 is the Oposhensky attack, which it is, the Oposhensky variation of the Najdorf, you're getting a more complete understanding. It's always helpful. Chess is one of those things. I always think it's kind of silly, but people get a lot of mileage out of reading out the names of specific openings from memory. I don't know. That's kind of lame, but in any case, I don't know them, and I hear other people doing that, so it has utility to learn these names. Bishop to e3 is the English variation, and bishop to e2 is the Oposhensky variation. Anyways, queen to e2 is what's played here. This isn't a named variation. Queen to g3, bishop to g5. And here I think that the main concepts for white are going to be castling queenside and then attacking on the king side. That's, I think, where white is going with this, but we'll see from the game, I guess. So castling queenside, the step one came right. Castles, e5, knight, basically pawn takes e5, knight to d7, knight takes. Okay, cool. So yeah, here I would just say that, in terms of ways that black can improve here, like, I don't know. This has been somewhat of an underwhelming opening for white. White's up by a little. The engine doesn't really like castling, and then it really doesn't like knight to f3. This is considered to be an error. So let's actually look at this. Let's look at the report here on this game. So here the engine is suggesting knight to e6. Knight to e6 is actually really interesting. So knight to e6 basically double threatens the queen and threatens to win the rook as well. What's going to happen in this situation is the knight and rook are going to go for the queen, and the rook will end up on d8. So that will basically cut the queen or cut the king from c1 off from going to the d file. And the eval for that is almost exactly equal. So it would basically be a knight, a rook, and a queen. Knight, a rook, and a pawn, which is the pawn that we moved from e4 to e5 for the sacrifice. Those three pieces traded for the queen directly. So I think white here plays knight to e6, and I think knight to e6 is the idea. With knight to f3, black can just play knight b d7, knight takes e5, and basically black's going to have a positional advantage here. This isn't particularly good for, first, knight takes d7 isn't playable because queen takes g5 with check. But the second thing is that, on, knight takes d5, it's just positionally worse for white. So instead, basically, the options for white, so bishop takes f6 after queen to a5 is practically forced. I guess bishop to f4 is also playable probably, but bishop takes f6 is forced to simplify in the center here at GM. So that's sort of what I'm thinking here. Bishop takes f6 and then black's up by about 1.3 pawns. So overall, a good situation for white. f4 and black has a big advantage. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Bishop takes f6 after queen to a5. Yep. Anyways, the tactical improvement for white here was knight to e6. This double threatens the queen and threatens the rook, and that was the improvement. So the game basically goes 1.5 points, which is actually a lot for a GM versus GM game. A swing of 1.5 pawns is usually fatal, I don't think white ever gets this back. I mean, white's trying, but I think black sort of maintains the edge. Basically puts black in the driver's seat, and black ends up winning the game. So yeah, interesting situation, interesting game. So thematically, what happened here? Queen to e2 is an offbeat line. This isn't one of the ones that we looked at. It's not a named opening line. Bishop to g5 came in. Castle's queenside came in. E5, and then white made a misstep here basically. I think we're out of opening theory. But the move here, as found by the engine, the improvement is knight to e6. Queen takes e5 is the engine line, with queen takes e5, queen g4, and this discovered threat on the queen, and then queen to e1 or whatever. But the actual real improvement here for in this game was knight to e6 is a playable move for white as opposed to knight to f3. That's really interesting. This knight going to e6 as opposed to f3 being basically decisive here. But anyways, this is an offbeat line. This was an interesting but offbeat line for white to play in this situation, and yeah, I guess I would say interesting stuff. Big picture, yeah, interesting idea. Anyways, really, yeah, cool and interesting. So what did we learn? We learned that the Najdorf didn't necessarily focus on the king side. It focused on the king side the most, actually, out of the four GM games that we looked at. With rook to g1 and g4 and g5 getting played as white. That was the way that white could improve there. And without playing those, it was much more difficult. Basically, it was difficult to steer things towards the king side. So the Najdorf Sicilian overall, the GMs make the non-aggressive king side attacks look more, look more playable, I guess I would say. From reading the ideas behind the chess openings and under my chess understanding, I think of the Sicilian as being basically a very simple game where you're kind of attacking aggressively on the king side as white and attacking aggressively on the queen side as black. But these Super GM games, they show that the modern style of playing, at least against the Najdorf Sicilian, is a lot more nuanced than that. The only game where there was a lot of play on the king side was rook to g1 and g4. And here, white was fine. Knight to e6 was basically playable here, and yeah, this provided opportunities for white. The rook on d1 facing d8, and all was well. So, anyways, interesting situation, and yeah, thank you very much for the recommendation. Cool. So let's take a look. Let's look at the three games for tonight. These games, for the first one is from TK I saw, and then let's take a look at TK's game versus Chespia. Okay, so this is TK playing Chespia. Let's see. So basically, C6 is the Panov, E4 and C4 is the Panov attack. G6, D4, bishop to G7. Overall here, I guess I would say that white is comfortable. White can play moves like knight to F3, knight to C3. Basically comfortable play. This should be fine for white. Knight to F3, knight to F6, knight to C3. Accelerated Panov, white's getting a big center. Black doesn't appear to be interested in playing D5 anymore, and yeah, I like white's position. Basically this has turned into a flank opening versus a center opening, and white's going to have the corresponding, positional advantage, spatial advantage, and basically spatial advantage in the center. So here, knight to c3, d6, and white's up like a pawn. Overall, yeah, it's like playing against the modern or the Perk or one of those flank openings. White's just basically playing, playing comfortably on the king side with a better center and a spatial advantage. Here, knight to e2 is the best play for white. H3 is not bad either. Yeah, no, thank you very much for asking, aka. Yeah, thank you very much for joining the stream. So yeah, H3 will push the G4 pawn or the G4 knight back. Good place for white probably include like E5. But yeah, thanks very much, aka. Thanks for being here. Knight to F6, E5, pawn takes, knight to D7. And bishop to f4, basically, this is going to put, support on the pawn on e5. But basically here, what I would say is knight to f3, knight to c3, d6, bishop to e3, and white's up like a pawn. This is comfortable. h3 is probably the most playable move for white. Bishop to d3 is also playable. But h3, yeah, is good. And white should basically just be focusing on how to turn his spatial advantage and better center into a long-term attack. Bishop to f4, but yeah, queen to h5 was an error. Basically, this limited the mobility of the queen. Just a very superficial play by black, I think. I think on bishop to d2, the best queen move. First, this queen move isn't. This queen moving this queen is not that important. Knight to d5 and the queen can comfortably go to d8, or knight to b5 and the same thing. So yeah, you shouldn't really be afraid of this discovered threat. It's not like you're gonna forget about the discovered threat. If white makes it, you'll have an opportunity to defend, the pawns that need to be defended off of a knight to d5 move. Anyways, queen to h5, steers the game towards white. Here, knight to e2 is good, h3 is good, but white's comfortable. So engine suggesting knight to e2. h3 is also fine, but the queen is displaced. Basically, the queen doesn't really have much of an opportunity to advance on the king side here. And with h3, g4, white should be getting pretty good opportunities. e5, pawn takes e5, white's up by about 2 pawns here. e6, knight b6. Yeah. Hey, thank you very much for the follow, Saya. Thank you very much for joining the stream, and thank you very much for the follow. It's a child. Thanks very much for joining. Yeah, appreciate it. So we were just looking over TK's game. Bishop to c2, f6, e6, knight to b6. White's up by like a pawn. Yeah, this is comfortable. So king to h2, I think is worse. So there were a number of kind of missteps, I think, by white here. I think the biggest one, the most glaring one, is putting the queen into a situation where this queen is basically... thank you very much for the raid, Sai. I really appreciate it. Thanks for joining. Queen to... and thanks, GM Nihonium. Thank you very much for joining. h3, the knight gets pushed to f6, e5, but basically this queen is super displaced over here. You might not have an immediate threat, but things like knight to e2, and then knight to g3, those types of attacks are just potentially very deadly. Hey, thank you very much for joining the stream, VJ. Thanks for being here. This is the Free Chess Lessons channel. I hope you guys, are interested in getting some free chess lessons. Yeah, no problem, VJ. Not at all. Never a problem. But yeah, knight to e2, knight to g3. I think this should basically come up with a way of pushing white's position forward. So knight to e2 followed by knight to f4, or knight to e2 followed by knight to g3. Those are the ways to really attack this queen. The queen's mobility is actually very limited here. If you play knight to e2, this queen can't go to a single place, right? Not to h6, not to h4, not to a5. The queen is stuck. So black voluntarily choosing to put his queen into, or his or her queen into the h5 square. This is an error for black, and it's about a 3.5 point error. If you just limit the mobility of the queen that much, that queen's just sort of the sitting duck for knight to e2, knight to g3. Anyways, h3 pushes the knight back, knight goes to f6, e5, knight takes, pawn takes, knight to d7. White's up by like 2 pawns here. Should be a pretty good situation. I think white needs to push forward. I think b4 would probably be what I play. Bishop to b3 is also playable, but you're sort of running out of tempo. I think bishop to b3 is a good idea. If knight takes e6, then pawn to c5, and you'll have at least the discovered attack on the king through the knight. So yeah, king h2, knight e6, knight to f4. Overall here, this game swings pretty aggressively towards black. Once basically the queen's mobility is no longer nearly as limited as it was, black's got good chances. Black's pieces are more organized. They're starting to, start an attack on like c4, and here I guess I would just say, white's advantage is gone. Once this file opens up for the queen to start attacking, white's losing a lot of his opportunities. Now just black has better posted pieces. The knight on c4 is definitely cool there. The knight on e6 is well defended. And, black has the potential to launch a kingside attack. So yeah, the game swings aggressively towards black. The correct, basically in terms of, and this, this turns into some tactical mess, but yeah, what I want to say in terms of improving white's game here, this is the Panov. It turns into like a perk modern type thing. good opportunities for white. And yeah, basically, white is better by like 1.3 pawns, and should be comfortable with the spatial advantage and center advantage. Queen to h5 is a bad mistake. White can play knight to e2 and knight to g3 and trap the queen. So yeah, I think queen to h5 voluntarily limits the queen's mobility, and white can play knight to e2, knight to g3. So, anyways, a really interesting situation, a really interesting outcome for white. And yeah, overall, I think white just had good opportunities, capitalized, and yeah, white ended up in a good place. Cool. E5, fractures the queen side and king side. Maybe in the context of playing knight to e2, but yeah, I think the better moves here for white really were like knight to e2, threatening the queen. The queen can't move anywhere, so this is your opportunity as white. That's the thing that I would redo in this game. Play knight to e2, knight to g3 more proactively. And yeah, with this situation having occurred, um, you're in a place where you basically you're in a place where you have a tactical win. There are tactics puzzles that will help you see knight to e2 and knight to g3. And yeah, this queen's mobility is very limited. White plays the best by capitalizing on it to it. Knight to e2 followed by knight to f4 is what the engine's talking about, and yeah, things are just good for white. So, anyways, on to the next game. But yeah, look at the possible, see the limited mobility of the queen. This was an awkward move, and capitalize on it as white in the next time you see kind of a similar position. Anyways, thank you very much for sending the game, TK. As always, very much appreciated. And let's take a look. Okay, so here's another game by TK. Let's just see if this is the same one. So this is a different one. This is basically a rematch. TK sent two together. He really wanted to look at both of these, and since I guess other people didn't send for that day, yeah, we can take a look. This is TK playing Chess Bia again. Let's look. So TK's playing black here instead of white. So in the last game, basically, TK was playing against the Caro-Kann and played the accelerated Panov. Here, TK's going for the elephant gambit. Knight takes e5, D takes e4, bishop to c4. Overall, here I think that this should be a situation in which white is pretty comfortable. The elephant gambit is refuted. I mean, knight to h6 is a clumsy move. Knight to d7 is the correct play for black here. Black knows this. Knight takes d7, bishop takes d7, and overall here, I guess I would just say that black is basically doesn't have much to do. So rook to e1, bishop e7, rook takes, castles. Basically, white's up by like 1.4 pawns. I think here probably the best is knight to d6. Knight to d6 seems to fork the rook and bishop, so I think that's a tactical win for black. And yeah, we can just look at this opening. So the first thing is Elephant Gambit. Elephant Gambit's an opening that we know. It's basically, it's basically a refuted gambit. It's a good surprise weapon for sure, but don't expect it to be the soundest play. But if you play the Elephant Gambit, you really need to have your tactics, all together. I think knight to d6 is the play here for black. This forks the knight on e4 and forks the bishop on c4. And I think with those pieces forked, black should be fine. Bishop to c6, rook to g4, bishop to f6, and white's up by like 1.3 pawns. Things are just comfortable. Knight to f3, a6, bishop to f4. Black is, the situation's about equal, is what I would say. So, anyways, white's up by about 1.4 pawns, and yeah. Yeah, black had this opportunity, didn't see the tactic that corresponded to it, and now black's losing. So another very interesting game. Basically an opportunity for improvement for black, and I guess what I would say here is that basically this situation, this situation offered better plays for black. E4, E5, D6. So D5 basically turns into Elephant Gambit. Bishop takes, knight to f5, bishop to e7. But the move here after castles is just very clearly knight to d6. If knight to d6 gets played, white's game is very stunted. And if and if it doesn't get played, then white's game is fine. But knight to d6, you win either an exchange or a piece, and that should lead you in a good direction as black. So I guess that's what I'm saying. As black here, knight to d6, threatening the rook on e4 and the bishop on c4. This is your best play as black. This is your improvement, and black is fine. So that's my thinking. Knight to d6, forking the rook on e4 and the bishop on c4. That's the way to improve as black here. And yeah, thank you very much, TK, for sending in the game. All right, cool. Let's go on to the last one here. Okay, this is the Reels game, and yeah, it's out of the ready. Awesome. Hey, welcome, Eric. Thanks very much for joining the stream. Thanks for being here. So yeah, this is the Reels game. Let's take it from the Reels perspective. The Reel plays is playing against one knight to f3, d5, c4, pawn takes c4, and basically here white's up by about half a pawn. This ready against d5. I think c4 is the most common move. No, it's not. It's d4. Okay, interesting. So let's look at this. So d4 is the Zucker-Tort variation of the queen's pawn opening, right? So d4 is used as a transpositional tool. G3, King's Indian attack. C4, the ready gambit. B3, Nimzowitsch Larsen. E3, not named. D3, old Indian attack. Interesting. B4, Santa Sears Folly. Okay, cool. That's interesting. Santa Sears Folly. Didn't know that that's what that was called. But we now know that. Knight to f3, d5, b4. Santa Sears Folly. Okay. Interesting. A3, knight to c3, reversed Mexican defense. Okay, didn't know that that was it. I mean, honestly, these I could go through these all day. It's really cool for me to get to learn these. Like I never got to learn them, so for me, this is still an exercise that's actually super interesting. E4, Tennyson Gambit. Okay. Hey, welcome, It's a Child. Thank you very much for joining the stream. A4, the potato variation. Okay, cool. Rook to G1, ample variation. All of these are actually really cool, to be honest. Knight to G1. I can't believe anyone ever played that, but yeah, this ready. Yeah, if we want to learn the ready systems, let's just learn these names, right? Like, we'll walk out of this smarter than when we walked in, right? If we learn the names. So D4 is Queen's Pawn opening. Yeah, thanks very much for joining the stream. Yeah, thanks very much for joining the stream. Yeah, thanks for being here. But yeah, D4 Queen Pawn opening, Zucker-Tort variation. G3 King's Indian attack. C4 ready gambit. B3 Nimzowitsch Larsen attack. E3 doesn't have a name. D3 old Indian attack. B4 Santa Sears Folly. I mean, these are cool. I don't know. I think it's cool to learn these. The obscure lines are kind of useless, but definitely learning the the more major ones. Knight to C3, the reverse Mexican's defense. All right. Anyways, C4, ready gambit. Okay, so this is a pure ready line, and with this, D takes C4, E3. Black's got opportunities like bishop to E6. This is the Kears variation. Knight to F6, E6. C5, and bishop to G4. So overall, I guess what I would say here basically is this is the ready gambit accepted, E3, and then white has opportunities. So like E3 facing in towards bishop takes C4, but bishop to E6 is the Kears variation. This holds on to the C4 pawn the most directly, and yeah, so bishop to E6 is what was played in the game. Knight to G5, bishop to D5. And white is showing about an eval advantage of about 0.8. E4, queen d6, pawn takes d5, queen to e5, queen to e2, queen takes. Cool. White's up by about 1.4, queen to c4, c6, d4, queen takes d5, and this makes black better. So I guess what I would say here in this situation, bishop on d5, white's up by about a pawn. Queen to d6 is playable here. I don't think it's the main line. I think we've gone through this before. Bishop to c6 is the main line here. And on bishop takes c4, e6. This is the main line out of this Kears variation. But yeah, basically e6, should face the bishop on c4, and be a strong play. So Anyways, pawn takes c4, e3, bishop to e6, knight to g5, bishop to d5. And yeah, white plays e4 here in the main line. All right. Queen to d6, pawn takes, queen to e5. Queen to d6 allows, basically the thing about queen to d6 is that it allows an extra developing move for white. On queen to e5, white blocks with queen to e2, then queen to g5, queen takes c4. And basically here, white's got some opportunities. So, the best play for white is knight to c3. Knight to c3 with the ability to retake on d5. That's good for white. But d4 and queen takes d5, and you just lose the pawn. So knight to c3 defends this pawn on d5, and also queen to b3 counter threatens this pawn on b7, comparing to the pawn that's hanging on d5. But basically here with c6, queen to d4, queen takes, pawn takes. Black's basically up by about 2.5 pawns. This is a solid position for black. Black is stronger. And basically this was an error for white in this situation. You have a good situation for black after this. So the first one is with queen to d6, queen to e5, queen to e2, queen takes g5. Basically, white's up by a good amount here, and I think instead, bishop to c6 is a better alternative. So here, e6 is also playable, by the way, just because e6, pawn takes d5, queen takes g5. But I think the best move for black is probably bishop to c6, then bishop takes c e6. Main line and yeah, the black can play. Anyways, interesting. Queen to d6, allows white to play queen to e2, and that gives white an edge. Then with the pawn on d5 getting hanging, black is winning, and yeah, I guess what I would say is that basically, this ends up in a situation where white is up by like 4 to 6 pawns, and good stuff. So yeah. I guess in this situation, I think we might wrap this a little bit early tonight, but yeah, the improvement for black was to not play this. There actually was opening theory here. It was bishop to c6 in this Kier's attack. Bishop to c6 after e4, then bishop takes c4, e6, and basically black is better. Black is better off than in the situation where you play queen to d6 and then queen to e5. So yeah, I guess what I would say there is basically with e6, d3, bishop to e7, knight to f3, knight to f6. Very interesting game overall. This is this is an interesting situation. Queen to d6, pawn takes, queen e5, queen takes, and yeah, white's up by like 2 pawns. Queen takes, pawn takes, and then hanging that d5 pawn for white was kind of a bad decision and pointless for white to do. So yeah. Anyways, what I would say is that as black here, you can kind of get strong play, yeah, I think knight to d7, knight to a5. Yeah, comfortable play, comfortable threats on d4, knight takes, knight to b7. This just ends up being fine. So white wins. Pretty straightforward game. So the opportunities for black primarily revolved around this queen to d6, queen to e5 maneuver. You steered away from the mainline theory, which was bishop to c6. Yeah, in this case, black carries this advantage for a bit. And with castles, knight to b3. But yeah, white basically gets a good advantage. So this is also an error. So castles is worse than king to d7. King to d7 and you have kind of a functional defense on c6. But with castles, you take the king out of the action, basically. The king's basically pretty secure on king to d7 defending c6. So I don't think there's much reason to move it here. King to d7 defending c6, and yeah, this is a better defensive maneuver for black. Castles, knight to b3, knight to d7. I think here basically, this was a misstep. Bishop takes was a blunder here. If you play knight to c4 instead, so here bishop takes c4, knight to c4 was considered to be the best move. After knight takes c4, bishop takes f6, rook takes c6. No threats against black here. So yeah. Anyways, good information, good stuff here. And yeah, I think basically this provided a way for white to or for black to basically improve in this game. So the first thing to change, this maneuver was not the correct one. Bishop to c6 was the opening theory move, and then the second one was once all this attacking gets started, you need to respond accurately. So king to d7 was actually the correct play for black. This the board is simplified enough that you don't need to castle anymore to support your king safety. And with king to d7, you're basically, defending c6 effectively. You have the ability to play bishop to d6, and yeah, black's up by like 2 pawns. So, anyways, this ends up in a good situation for black. And overall, bishop to e5, bishop takes, knight to e7. This sort of collapses. Basically, instead, king to d7 here was a better opportunity for black, and with castles, you're kind of running into some. Castles basically, I don't know. I guess what I would say is that castles is not a good way to support c6. You need to have your king still involved. You taking the defensive characteristics of your king in this position is important, and that would have provided a better resource for you. Anyways, these openings were really interesting. Knight to f3, d5, c4, pawn takes c4, and then bishop to e6 is the cures variation. I'm also curious on this ready gambit. So this is the cures variation. Is e6 is nothing, knight to f6 is nothing. I think the only one that was named was bishop to e6. Okay, bishop to e6, and then d4, knight to a3, knight to g5, knight to c3, queen to c2. And yeah, basically, I would say with this bishop on e6 facing c4, that makes white try to get the bishop off the board so that the c4 pawn can be lost. e4, queen d6. This was not the correct tactic. In the real game, knight to g5 and then bishop to c6 and then e6. It's okay to give back the c4 pawn. I mean, it was a gambited pawn anyways. If you're getting a reasonable position out of it. So bishop to c6 and then e6. Bishop to c6 and then e6 and then knight d7. I mean, basically just healthy development for black after this. e4, queen to d6, queen to e5, and yeah, I guess I would just say in general here, this is a good way for black to play. Knight to f6, knight to c6, e6, bishop to b4. And yeah, I think that ends up being a better overall idea than this queen to d6, queen to e5 maneuver. Anyways, really interesting game, really interesting openings, and yeah, I mean, I guess we can take a look a little bit more at TK's second game. I want to just go back on this for a second and take a look. There are a few more opening lines that I was interested in seeing here. So yeah, in this situation, TK is playing black. And this Elephant Gambit, yeah, so Elephant Gambit, is not really playable, I guess is the end. I was going to try to come up with lines that would make this Elephant Gambit playable, but I think at the end of the day, black just really shouldn't play this. White's going to get a solid advantage no matter what. So bishop to d6 is given by the engine as the most popular. I think bishop to d6 is probably correct. I think bishop to d6 is probably the correct response on either e takes d5, where bishop to d6 is basically is tied roughly for the most popular move, or knight takes e5, in which case bishop to d6 is also tied for the most popular move, or is also the most popular move. So bishop takes bishop to d6, d4, d takes e4, knight to c4, and basically here, white's up by like 3. And yeah, I guess what I would say is that that f5 probably offers the most promising opportunity. f5, knight f6, knight takes d6, queen takes d6. That seems like a good way to go about doing this. So, anyways, really interesting, I think. With knight to c4, f5, knight to f6, knight takes d6, queen takes d6. I think this ends up being a good way to a good way to progress your position as black. maybe b5, maybe c6 then b5. But threats on knight takes d6, knight to f6, and queen takes d6. That makes sense. So on bishop to d6, d4 is the most common option. Knight takes f6, that's kind of a crazy line. But okay, so it's d4 is the line. So on knight takes e5, d4 for white, then d takes e4, and then options for white include knight to c4, knight to c3, f4. And let's just look at the eval, because I'm kind of curious. So which is actually considered to be the best for white? Here, bishop to c4 is considered to be the strongest. That's the fourth most popular option. And there you play bishop takes e5, pawn takes e5, queen takes d1, queen takes d1, king takes d1. So yeah, that was actually interesting. So pawn takes d4, bishop to c4, bishop takes e5, pawn takes e5, or queen to h5, but pawn takes e5, queen takes d1, king takes d1, knight to c6, and yeah, I guess I would say, you know, black is better. This is actually a pretty good transposition for black, where the eval slides. So after bishop to c4, bishop takes e5, and then queen to h5 is a clear first. That's interesting. So queen to h5 here. Yeah, absolutely, Coder. Yeah, feel free. Definitely ask away. You know, honestly, like, I'm just here I learn a lot from this. It's really helpful for me to get to do these streams. So, but yeah, if you have any questions, like, always feel free to ask them. It's often really good for me, in thinking about how people are looking at things. So yeah, queen to h5. This threatens on f7 and e5. But yeah, to do well-rounded studies, 1800 to 1900. I guess what I would say is that basically, the things that you can do first, I would get your tactics to be as good as they can. But at that point, you really do need to start diversifying what your study is. If you've made it to 1800, 1900, you've made it pretty far, realistically. Like, a lot of people don't make it to 1800, 1900. They just lose interest, or they don't, but they don't make it. But there, you've already probably got some reasonably good tactical play. I guess what I would say for 1800, 1900 to do well-rounded studies, what you could probably do is you could, you basically could go and, study positional play. There's a few good books on positional play. I really like Chess Structures by Rios. That's in the recommendation section of my Discord. But yeah, Chess Structures by Rios is a great kind of positional game, good for understanding pawn structures and kind of how things are supported. And then so that's a good one. There's Modern Chess Strategy by Pac-Man. That's also very good. And then I would say there's a program made by the same people who make CT-ART. There's a program called Peshka, which is pretty good. And this Peshka program basically is it's the type of program where you basically can do problems. Basically, they're similar to chess tactics on CT-ART. But on Peshka, you can basically, they're the same kind of, question and answer session. But the format is instead based on tactical games as opposed to, positional games. Good question, Giant. Let's think. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking, Giant Growth. Here, let me send you the link to the Discord. Send it. Feel free to send the Discord link to this. Giant. Feel free. There's the Discord. If you put the game in the game submission section, feel free to send it. Feel free to send the game. And I guess I would say that Discord, in the game submission section, you should be able to look over games. Thank you very much for that. Anyways, this is interesting. And in terms of ways to improve this game, let's just go through a look TK. The first thing I think is that Elephant Gambit is pretty speculative. Cool, yeah. Share games. No, post in the game submission section, Giant. You're making a good point. Maybe that's a little bit ambiguous, but Yeah, game submission section, the other one. Knight to f3. Sorry to be so particular, but yes, just put it in the game submission section, just so it's all in one place. I mean, realistically, I'll figure it out, but e5, d5, knight takes e5, pawn takes e4. Basically, white's better here. Knight to h6, knight to h6 is kind of an awkward resource. Yeah, no, for sure, Giant. Yeah, thank you very much for bringing it up. Bishop to e7, and then the real error here, for black is not playing knight to d6. Knight to d6 is available on 2 separate moves here for black, and it wins a piece or an exchange on either move. After knight to d6, there's focus of the knight to d6 on e4. There's focus of the knight on d6 to c4, and those are opportunities for black to improve there. So, if you're interested, you can make the improvement knight to d6, but honestly, the Elephant Gambit is kind of a rough and refuted opening. I guess I would say it's not super valuable for black. I mean, good as a surprise weapon, but overall not a first line opening to be played. And we learned a little bit. I mean, basically the response is bishop to d6, either on pawn takes e5 and on pawn takes d5, and bishop to d6. Yeah, thanks very much, Giant. Yeah, it'll be on the stream. I'll confirm it in reasonably soon. But yeah, thank you very much for sending the game over. Appreciate it. So yeah, white's up by about 1.4 pawns. I think knight to d6 is the play here for black. Knight to d6 forking the rook on e4 and the bishop on c4. I think that's the best play for black here. Otherwise, white's in pretty good shape. It becomes tactically complicated. Black makes an error, and white wins. So anyways, I think we should wrap the stream. I'm sort of sleepy. I did a long stream this morning, so I'm good to wrap it a little bit early tonight. Thank you all very much for being here. Thanks all for joining the stream. They're free chess lessons. I think that's a good deal, but yeah, I get to learn a lot. Hopefully you guys get to learn a lot, and yeah, it's way better than the current model. So happy to help things. But yeah, so anyways, yeah, thanks all for being here. Thanks all for joining, and the next stream is at 8 a.m. Eastern tomorrow. That's in about 9 hours, and I look forward to seeing you then. Thanks very much for being here. Good night, everyone. Thanks. Bye.